principal of East Side Community School in New York sent out a graphic to his community detailing the 8 types of whiteness. The scale shows white identities ranging from good white identities to bad white identities. But even that is a little bit of a misnomer, because the premise of the scale is that white people are bad. Being white, just being a white guy, which, by the way, the principle is defining. The left is defining. Sometimes the left wants to say, hey, there's no such thing as whiteness. Come on, whiteness is a social construct. Well, whiteness is not particularly important to my identity. I don't think of myself primarily as white. I think of myself Catholic, American, New Yorker, or at least originally, now Tennessean. I think of all these conservative, whatever. But the left seems to know what white means. The left seems to be able to identify who white people are, and the left is calling for the abolition of white people and for social disadvantage for them. But he says the good white people are so-called white abolitionists, and the bad white people are white supremacists. So the 8 categories. You start with the worst one, that's a white supremacist. Who's a white supremacist? I don't know. I don't really see very many of them, but I'm told that 75 million Americans are white supremacists. Then there's a white voyeurism. What is white voyeurism? I know it sounds kind of kinky. I don't know. I don't know what white voyeurism is. Then there's white privilege. Notice, by the way, it's shifting. Obviously, whoever put this graphic together is not the most literate person in the world. You have white supremacist, then you get an ism, then you get a privilege, white privilege. Then you get white benefit. I guess that's where it's like you get certain advantages from being white, like having to listen to these idiots tell you how evil you are. Then there's white confessional. It's like, I guess, the early stages of white guilt. Then there's white critical. That's where you sort of don't like yourself because of your skin color. Then there's white traitor. So I guess that's just what it sounds like. And then there's white abolitionist. Abolitionist. You want to abolish white people. It's funny, because when the racial identitarians on the right, call it whatever you want to call them, white supremacist, white neo, this or that, when they say in their sort of most fevered protestations, they'll say the left is anti-white and they want to abolish white people, and you say, oh, okay, yeah, I don't know about that. But then these guys come out and they say that very thing. They say, yeah, we want to abolish white people. What do they think is going to happen here? There was a Pew Research survey, I've mentioned it on the show a few times, that measured racial consciousness, how important race is to one's sense of identity. And it found out that race is very important to the identity of Black people, Hispanic people, and Asian people in America. You just measure, you say, do you think race is important or very important to you? And it's something like greater than 50% of those groups said, yes, it is. Number for white people was 15%. White people, broadly speaking, do not have this racial consciousness. It's ironic, because we are told by the left that white people are the only people who can be racist. What does racism mean? I guess racism, as I think of racism, it is a hatred, an animosity for people on the basis of their race, which is wrong, because racism is an affront to human dignity. But the way the left defines racism, it's sort of like, it's completely divorced from reality, because racism is apparently only held by people who have, statistically speaking, the least racial consciousness of anybody in the country. What do you think the end game of this is? Because what I would like, what I think would lead to a nice flourishing society, is if people didn't think primarily about race. I mean, to some degree, you think about race. I'm descended from Italian people. I eat a lot of pasta. Obviously, I speak with my hands. I'm doing that right now. So I'm not saying there's no such thing as race or something like that. But race has its proper place, right? I don't lead marches. I'm not a spaghetti supremacist or something like that. When you make an idol out of race, you get racism, very bad. The state has a proper place in our lives. When you make an idol out of the state, you get statism. Individuality, our sense as individuals, has its proper place in a polity. When you make an idol out of that, you get hyper-individualism. Society starts to break down. So you don't want to make an idol out of these things. You don't want to utterly deny them either. But what the left is telling us is that race is basically the most important thing. We should make an idol out of it. We should pursue a racist policy. And we're going to castigate people who have basically very little racial identity on the basis of their race. All that can do, the only thing that will happen from that, is to increase racial identity and division. Maybe that's what the left wants. I assume it is. But this isn't just happening at some kooky school in New York. Now, you know this. You've seen this kind of stuff in corporate boardrooms. You've seen this kind of stuff in a lot of PSAs. We do the woke commercials on my YouTube channel where you don't even know what product these companies are selling. They're just selling racial grievance or sexual grievance. But you see this all around the country, notably at a school in Philadelphia that is honoring black communism. There is a school in Philadelphia that is honoring black communism and black power. This comes to us by way of Christopher Rufo at City Journal, who's covering critical race theory. So a teacher at a school, William D. Kelly School in Pennsylvania, is leading 10 and 11-year-old students into the school auditorium to simulate a black power rally to free Angela Davis, a communist terrorist, from prison because she was once held in prison awaiting trial on charges of conspiracy, kidnapping, and murder. And the teacher in Philly had the students walk around with signs that read Black Power, Jail Trump, a little anachronistic given when Angela Davis was on trial, Free Angela, and Black Power Matters. They chanted about Africa, they chanted about ancestral power, then Free Angela, Free Angela. Angela Davis, when I say she's a communist, I mean she was an actual member of the Communist Party and won the International Lenin Peace Prize, ironically named, which is given out by the Soviet Union, right? I mean, this woman is a hardcore communist terrorist. This is the curriculum being taught at William D. Kelly School. Now, you're going to be shocked to hear this. Sit down to hear this. William D. Kelly School, one of the worst performing schools in Pennsylvania. I know you would have thought with such a brilliant curriculum such as this, that these would be the most urbane, educated graduates anywhere in Pennsylvania, right? No. William D. Kelly School has just 3% proficiency in math by 6th grade, 9% proficient in reading. By graduation, only 13% of students who graduate from this school will have achieved basic literacy. Now, obviously, this school should be shut down. Not serving students at all, probably destroying these students' lives by utterly failing them on education, filling their heads with a bunch of stupid and evil ideas. Are conservatives willing to say that? Because this is a radical agenda that is being pushed. Probably the school doesn't want to educate the children because educated students would understand what bunk all of this is. Much better for these political radicals to keep everybody stupid and uneducated. Much more likely that people will be compliant that way. But I think a lot of conservatives don't want to touch this stuff because conservatives don't want to be called racist. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, wait a second, these people on the right, or on the left rather, they're the ones pushing racism. The people on the right are opposing racism. I know. But because of that, conservatives are so touchy about this sort of thing. They don't want to be accused of any mean term, especially because of the extraordinary prominence of racism, in canceling people, right? This term racism, that they just don't want to touch it. The only way that we're going to be able to retake the culture is by speaking plainly about these things. People should not be given special privileges because of their race based on claims of historical grievance or this sort of wicked ideology, communism, whatever. Students should not be participating in Free Angela Davis reenactments. Students should not be taught that communism is a good thing. You might be able to hear my newborn son crying in the background right now as I record from home. And he obviously is in great agreement that society is in turmoil and we have to do something about it. We need to be able to clearly state we believe this, we don't believe this. Not just, hey, we're going to be inclusive and yeah, we can teach critical race theory, but we should also maybe teach Shakespeare or something. No, we need to be much more serious about this. We need to be exclusive about this. We need to say, this trash does not belong in schools. Teachers who teach this sort of thing, critical race theory, this teacher, whoever did the Angela Davis thing, that teacher needs to be fired. That teacher probably should never be hired again by any school. That teacher should be ostracized from his community. This sort of thing should, if this does show up at a school, the administrators of that school should probably be fired. They should at least be deeply ashamed. We should say enough is enough. We're going to teach good things that will form students' brains in the right way, that will teach them how to read, how to write, how to think, that will teach them to have an ordered view of the good, that will teach them virtue, that will teach them not to do vice, not to engage in vice, and to shun all those sorts of wicked things. The currently open, subjectivist, relativistic kind of tone that we have on the right, it ain't going to work. New York Post is reporting more schools are ditching Shakespeare. Remember, I was talking about this years ago when Yale started minimizing the role of Shakespeare in the English department. People said, oh, it's not a big deal. Come on, Michael. They're making the curriculum a little more inclusive. No, they're not. They're not. What the left is doing is taking out the old good books and replacing them with new bad books. And they're justifying this on their stupid racial theories, which are not only dumb, but also wrong and evil. Ayanna Thompson, who's an English professor at Arizona State University, said in an interview that, quote, Shakespeare was a tool used to civilize black and brown people in England's empire, and therefore we got to get rid of it. She's half right. The thing is, Shakespeare is a tool to civilize all of us. And I don't know if I'm brown or so, I'm swarthy. I'm Sicilian. Are we brown? I don't know. Are we white? I don't know. Maybe maybe I'll be able to escape the worst consequences of the new racial regime the left is pushing. Just I'm a little swarthy. Probably not, though. I think they're actually going to go after me, especially on the basis of my views. Shakespeare civilizes all of us. Shakespeare teaches us about human nature, teaches us about who we are, teaches us how to make sense of our freedom, how to make sense of our worst impulses, how to make sense of the places that we live in. What the left is pushing is a sort of scientific view. They're saying there's no such thing as human nature. Different peoples are different races are different. And by the way, it's all subjective and it's all just words, as Hamlet would say. The left would know that if they were not so illiterate, practically illiterate and then culturally illiterate too. What the right is pushing, what conservatives advocate, is a much more serious scientific view, meaning there is objective reality. There is such a thing as human nature. We all share that human nature, and we need to come to understand that. That is science too. That is a much more serious scientific perspective, the recognition of human nature and a politics that acknowledges human nature. That's much more serious than the sort of random COVID reopening policies or the dire threats of global warming. I think that the attacks on human nature that are being done, the attacks on our educational system, a far greater threat than global warming or anything else. If you enjoyed that break from disinformation, historical revision, and screaming about the end of the world, be sure to hit the subscribe button so that you never miss another video.